Awesome. Welcome back to Built to Ship. Today I'm joined by Rob, the co founder of Observe Point and now Petra coach working there. Looking forward to having Rob on the pod. Rob, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Tyler. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's start with your background. Tell me a bit about the company that you founded, what that journey was like. Yeah, start there and how that got you to move on to Petra coach.
Yeah, it's a good story. So myself and a fellow co-founder were actually on the back deck talking about some of the problems that we solved. He was the co-founder of OnMature, which sold to Adobe, and I was co-founder of a company called iLead Media, which sold as well. So we were trying to figure out like what the next stage was, and we both realized that there was a real problem with large website implementations around their marketing tech, like what's working and what's not working, and that's kind of grown into privacy as well. So that was like a big issue that we saw, and we started that company. I became CEO. He focused mainly on product for a little bit, and while we did that, I raised a Series A with some great folks at Pelion, and then did a Series B with incredible folks at Mercado, both great firms here in Utah. Grew the company. We won lots of awards and all that kind of jazz, and that was all really fun stuff. And it was a big project. The company's still operating and doing exceptionally well. It's a hard product to try to get the solve for it. It's taken a while to really nail the product, but that's happened the last couple of years. It's been really a fun journey. There was so much to learn from both just being in the operational side of things, just to understanding how the VC world works, how investors work, how they think. And was very grateful for my experience there, and incredibly still optimistic for where the company is now and where it's growing.
Amazing. I'm curious to ask, what was your favorite part of that journey? Like, I think, every part has its own ups and downs, but, oftentimes founders enjoy maybe the early stage, or maybe is it the A to B? What stood out for you as the most enjoyable or maybe most challenging?
It's always hard to pick a singular thing. Um, the people you surround yourself with, that's always a highlight. People who are still friends. I get reach outs pretty consistently saying, I loved working at Observe Point. You're one of the favorite CEOs I've ever worked under. All of those type of things that's probably the highlight. Really, kind of when you think back, when you're in the trenches, I think the highlights are often the revenue goals for me. When we hit 10 million in ARR, that's always a kind of a big milestone. When we hit 15, we threw kind of a big impromptu party. I think those two kind of felt like, okay, not a lot of companies ever get to these milestones, even when they're funded. And so to do that, to accomplish that, I think is probably kind of, those were the days where like, oh my gosh, we really did something. But as you look back, I think it's always less about the goals in the trenches and the memories that you make and the learnings that you have from it. I think that's really when you look back on your times when you're operating in your life. I think that's what you think back on.
Amazing. Yeah, the team definitely is super important. It's amazing to have, people to work with that are interesting or, interested in the same things, passionate, want to work together to accomplish a big goal. And 10 and 15 million ARR, that's amazing. Congrats on that. Wanted to ask a bit about, Petra Coach. What brought you there from Observe Point, and tell me the story there.
Well, I wouldn't be at Petra if I hadn't had the experiences at Observe Point, in two ways. One is, to fellow founders, if you're out raising money, or you've raised, or you're trying to really grow and scale the company, I believe you've got to bring every tool to the toolkit. Like you're going to get this is your swing, this is your at bat, right? And everything you can do to help you is something I think you have to look at. Right? During the time I was, growing and scaling Observe Point, one of the things you're trying to understand is like, how often are we meeting? How are we communicating? What's the vision? How do I translate some of these big pieces into operational type goals and efficiencies? And, figuring out some type of structure that helps pull some of the pieces together. And that's not normally in the founder's natural training or wheelhouse. Most founders have their fair sense of ADD. They're all over the place. They're always excited. And so it helps put some guardrails on the business, because you can't, as you grow and scale, you just can't be the same business as you were the previous year. And that's really around like a scaling up operating system. If you haven't read the books, you should. And that's what Petra's founded on, is both the Rockefeller habits and scaling up, where you're just really focusing on people, strategy, execution, cash. So I did some of those things at Observe Point, but if I knew what I know now, I would tell myself, go hire a great coach to help you. Like, you're going to get you have your at bat here, right? This is your chance. You may not get another one. A lot of founders think, well, I'm going to sell the first one and go on to the second one. You should go ask founders who are on their third or fourth ones. There's not a lot. And if they they'll usually go back and say, yeah, you got to bring every tool to bear. And so that's what Petra is an incredibly useful system to help businesses grow and scale. And it's an exceptional group of coaches. All of us have a lot of background. I raised a Series A, I raised over $30 million for Observe Point. And you have to have some type of track record to kind of qualify to become a coach. So I worked my ass off, actually, to become a coach. They're a hard group and a disciplined group, and it was really great to be part of it. But what Petra really does is takes your business and help you understand how you're going to get it from here to there. And what it does for a lot of founders, which wasn't so much an Observe Point problem, but it is for a lot of others, is the tail wags the dog often in the business. Like, a lot of CEOs, you're working in the business, not on the business, and the business works for you is like the dream. Instead, you work for the business. And part of growing and scaling and getting what you want out of your business, and as being a founder, is saying, no, the business works for me. I don't work for it. And I work on the business and in the business in some combination. And, as a younger founder, I think that's a pretty common problem. The differences between those two are not well understood, and you need to understand both of those differences.
Definitely. No, all that resonates and makes sense. I think, we went through Y Combinator in summer of last year, and it's interesting to see just a range of people from all over the world and all different ages and experiences. You have people who actually, I think maybe one or two, maybe just graduated high school, and some of them are like dropouts of college, and others, I kind of felt a little old being there, just because I had already had, a bit of a career and, worked at a startup that scaled to around 100 million. And so like, uh, it's interesting to see like the processes that, honestly, the lack of process in a lot of these startups. And I'm sure, obviously there's a balance, and we probably lean a little bit more on the strategic and process side than some of the others, but there's also a benefit to having that, ADD, jumping after everything and building quickly, but definitely the balance,
Yeah,
seems like the ideal place.
I think so. And I think it's also naturally a human ability. Like, we all have personality types. We all have things that we do better than others, and some things just tend to align with people being more operational and organizationally like structured. I had some of those muscles, if you will, at Observe Point, but a lot of, especially very creative founders, that's just not their strength. And a lot of times you take away their superpower by trying to have them do things that they're not naturally good at. And so one of the, I think the most important things to start to understand is, okay, what do I have myself? What are my superpowers? What am I really good at? What am I not so good at? And what is my team good at and not good at? And how do I fill those gaps? And how do we make sure we're communicating about them? And how are we understanding that we're transparent about them? And if you can get there and basically start acting more like a professional, if you will, then I think you get better results. And I think we see that at all levels of elite competition. Most people are sports fans, so go take whatever team that you're a fan of. It's an NBA team, soccer team, whatever. And people play different positions. And they do that for a reason, because they have different skill sets and a different need. And that's no different than an executive team inside of a company. You need a different set of skills to be highly functional and extremely, sound as a team.
Makes total sense. Yep. Yeah, always looking for folks that, fit a job description, but also complement, the rest of the team, especially when, you're at a really early stage and, you're 5 to 10 people. It's a lot easier to balance those things. I'm kind of curious how that all changes as you get to the larger numbers of teams. But really, where I want to take this next is you mentioned like how important, the right balance of like the strategic process and other skills that you build later on in your founding career, how important they are. How does AI change any sort of strategy around that? Like, do you weave that into, your work and your advising?
I think you have to. Um, uh, today, Grok 4 is announced, and Elon states that it's a PhD level at every level, no exceptions. And so, if you're not harnessing that to help make your output better, then I think you're falling behind. One of the things that I think I coach on, and others in the Petra organization do as well, is this idea of like, what is your machine team doing compared to your human team? And I think that is now a question that when you're now looking for filling a role, the first question you may have to ask yourself is like, what is the function of this role? Because we kind of start with people first, and I think we are beginning to really understand that we shouldn't do that anymore. We Instead of saying people first, let's talk function first. What is our primary function of this role? What's the accountability look like, and go from there. And we're going to find places that we feel like a machine team is going to fill that. And in the coming years, that machine team might literally be a robot for a lot of roles. Right now, I think in most software side roles, it's AI in an interface, kind of how we're used to interacting right now. And I think every executive team has to back up and for the next hire say, okay, is this a machine team role? Is this a human team role? And if it's a machine team role and you don't understand what machines we're going to use, how, when, and where, you're going to have all the same problems that we see with companies that when they go and hire a bunch of people and they haven't thought it through and they have a bunch of resources and they're like, well, this isn't working and why isn't it working? And they spend a lot of ton of money on SaaS tools, and it's going to be the same thing. I don't think AI solves the human dysfunction of trying to learn how to work with machines. So if we're going to use AI, which is obvious that you're going to have to, in my view, then we need to better learn how to work as an org on the machine team and with the machine team. And I think that's got to be a way that we look at the future.
Love that. And on that note, like, I'm curious what you've seen. What we've seen as we're going out into the market is there's almost two camps. There's the executives, like it's there's very few people that are saying like AI has no use for me. But there's the folks that are kind of like, yeah, we're gonna wait and see. We're gonna build like tons of policies, and then something changed with a model, and then they have to rehash those policies and approach, and they're kind of like too scared to dip their feet in the water. And then there's the other folks who are just kind of like rapidly testing small prototypes and then getting better and better at using AI and machines. Are you seeing a similar theme? And what's your thoughts on like which is the better approach?
Well, if I hear of a company that does the former, I suggest that they rethink that policy of what they're doing. My thought would be that you're already falling behind in the way that you just approach it. Maybe you're dipping your toe in the water, with little harm when the AI, with currently the way AI is, leveraging AI for research, for business development, for understanding, for go to market, for marketing materials, all the most easy ways that it takes our skills and leverages them. That should be a personal way that you're developing as a professional, even inside of an organization that maybe isn't leaning in very strongly. That can still be an individual priority of yours to say, you guys as a group aren't super into AI. I don't think you are thinking about this correctly, and I want to lead the charge personally. Then I think everybody who is a smaller company and that can lean in and use AI faster has a competitive advantage. And it'll be really interesting to see if there's a sweet spot for companies and where that sweet spot might be. Because I think there's probably $500-600 million organizations that are absolutely going to crush it with AI, and I think there's companies that are $5 or $6 million that are going to have similar net positive effects. I see it being more difficult for really large organizations to leverage AI in the same way that a small, nimble organization will. And I think there's a lot of historical precedents for that. And if you look back with telecom, PCs and machines when they first came on, I think we've seen that mobile communications. Take your pick. Younger, faster, more nimble companies win. And so if you're a bigger org that's not, actively thinking and being aggressive with it, you're falling even further behind in terms of where history puts you.
Why do you think then, you're right, there's so many historical examples that, when a new wave of technology comes on, you need to jump on it and just start using it and learning. Why then do you think that businesses still struggle to do that? Like, why are there still these executive teams that need to be coached into understanding like what they're missing out on?
I think fear is probably the first thing. Companies get paralyzed with a little bit of fear. I think when they have a lot to lose, when they're embedded as the leader, I think it's much harder for them to change. I think that's another thing that we've seen in history as well. So I think that's at the core of it, because I think it feels disruptive to power structures inside organizations. And I think if we haven't learned anything in the last, you know, 5+ years, is that America is incredibly tribal and people are tribal. And inside organizations that are big enough to have different cliques and tribes, you get the same kind of power dynamics that can be really unhealthy for it. Part of those is not wanting to address known problems because it upsets the current power dynamics.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think that happens, and I think that's a human problem. And I think AI will be particularly disruptive and particularly difficult for companies that have that in their culture. If you don't have a culture of openness, of trying new things, I think that's something you got to work on.
A lot of those companies have maybe even in their state, either like mission statement or their whatever values, they say we're open, they say we try things, but then they don't. When you actually go and advise them and coach them, how do you break through? Like, how do you change that thinking?
That's a good question. I wish it was as easy as walking in the room and getting people to change, but that's just not the way it is. Change has to come from the inside. So one of the things I try to focus on is helping them understand how positive that can be for them and their organization. That change, while difficult, creates some uncertainty, but that uncertainty can be leveraged to make you and the company better. And so there's a lot of upside to change. And I think if I'm able to kind of communicate that way, then a lot of the other pieces come naturally. How to use AI? How do we think about the functions and accountabilities and the roles? How do we think about our new hires? How do we think about go to market? All these different pieces kind of flows for them. From my senses, from both as an operator, as a CEO multiple times, and now I'm the coach on the other side of it. Plus, I sit on a couple boards. I think the best teams have an internal desire to change, and the best coaches bring that out in them.
Amazing. Yeah, really, really insightful. Okay, to get into maybe a little bit more, details and tactics around using AI, where are the places that you use it in your, either in your previous business or, Petra coach, or that you advise companies to kind of start?
Well, that's a good question because everybody's all over the place on like picking which model's best. And there's now enough models that you have to pick what model's best for the task that you're doing. And perhaps that's going to change within the next year. Perhaps Grok 5 is going to be so good you don't need to do some of these more narrow focuses. Maybe there's a new emergent winner. Obviously, the space is changing so fast. I don't think anybody has a very good crystal ball on that one. My place to tell everyone to start is to start saying what's the job that we're trying to get done. Not hey, this is Marcy in marketing, and let's have Marcy go do these things. It's more like, well, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to create new graphics? And are we trying to rebrand ourselves? Are we going to use Donald Miller's story brand? Do we have to come up and understand, the hero's journey for our brand? It's something that AI is particularly good at because it's particularly good at language. And how do we polish our mission statement? I think those kind of things become easier to say, what do we want done? And then kind of back into the tool from there. And because AI itself is not a universal tool yet. There's a slightly different tool for best performance, and I do think though that's often where people do get stuck. And so my caution against that would be, don't let perfection be the enemy of good here. Like, it doesn't matter if you're not on the latest model. It doesn't matter if you don't know, what's best for coding, and should we be using Replit? And I just heard that Meta changed over. They're not even using Llama anymore. They've gone over to the Sonnet models, right? I just read that yesterday. I think there's all these pieces that people are like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do. Just start one. Just start using it. There's multiple 10 to 15-minute YouTube videos from lots of really, really bright people, a lot brighter than me on this, trying to help them understand how to use it. And I think that's where you start. I think that's a genuine curiosity rather than a genuine fear is probably the ultimate place to start. I'm curious about how this can help me in my career rather than the idea of I'm scared of how this is going to replace me in my career.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, especially on the part of like model fatigue. We find we've actually made a conscious decision in our product to not expose like every single model option. We, intelligently route, they can kind of choose categorically, do I want speed over quality, etc. But we find that like people will get stuck for weeks doing some sort of testing when it's like, oh, you could have just deployed this thing and see that it already has 90% accuracy with whatever model you chose, and then go and optimize it after that.
Right.
So yeah, the bias towards action definitely feels important in this age where there's so much new information every day, so it's easy to get overwhelmed too. So yeah, love that.
Yeah, I agree. So that just starting with that curiosity, I think is the place to be. And I think as an organization, um, when you have people in, if you're in a leadership team, and whether it's somebody who you sit across from or that answers to you, I think when you feel resistance around using AI models, just the a question that's always a good one is, what's getting in your way of just starting and beginning with it? Like, and then finding out. And they might have some perfectly good reasons, but if it's been a multi-week, multi-month, almost a year process where you're still going to think about AI and you're still going to be doing something, that's not AI's problem. That's your problem. And I think that's going to hold you back if you don't get that solved.
Still humans, there's still humans in the loop that are causing the friction, and yeah, totally
For
makes
sure.
sense.
And when
When
you
it
when you guys do your models and the way you guys think about models,
Mhm.
I'm curious, where do you expect the product to be in just a year from now with the model development? Do you think it's a 2, 3x, 4x improvement? What type of real world operational improvements are you guys seeing with your best customers?
Yeah. On the note of like where we see models going, number one, we don't train LLMs ourselves. We kind of, benefit off of all of the open source work that's going on and all the investment in the private
Right.
spaces as well. And I think what you mentioned is definitely a trend we're seeing, which is certain models are good at certain categories, but now it's becoming even more, like you said, very specific tasks. And so that's like a lot to ask an executive or a product manager or even an engineer who might, if you're not an AI engineer whose whole day is researching these things, reading white papers, etc., and you're just being asked to like ship this one AI feature, that's a lot for you to like decide what to use where. And so a lot of our vision for how we continue to add new models is to, maybe eventually we'll give the user, the access to optimize and test once they have something out there. But we want to take, 90% of the work off their plate, get them something in production quickly that has, high accuracy and can be tuned and tweaked after that. And so I think like just over time, there's going to be more and more open source models that are going to be more and more fine tuned to specific types of tasks. Folks are creating new data sets every day for very specific use cases that can then be used for improved, fine tuning for, I don't know, filling out a Jira ticket or whatever the thing is. And so, you know, we just want to continue to make that accessible and easy for our customers. And in terms of where our customers are seeing like a lot of the value and the sort of wins that they're getting, we've found a trend that most businesses start with like internal workflows, internal tools, maybe even internal products that they have built, like let's say a CRM or some other system that's built in house.
Mm-hmm.
They start there because they are nervous about putting AI in front of customers. Those use cases are really easy to measure ROI because you can just see, let's say you're automating a process that you were previously paying an expensive, you know, wage for, and now that person only has to spend 50% of their time on that thing. Bam, that's immediately measurable. And then once they start to get comfortable with that, we really try to make it as easy as possible to deploy other sort of use cases, whether it's, you know, another sort of internal workflows or then customer facing. And these things aren't always chatbots. They're sometimes just buttons that are powered by AI that do an analysis for you, right? The best interface isn't always a chat. But yeah, so that's kind of the sort of journey we see customers take, because, you know, it makes sense. It's a new technology, and, you know, putting anything in front of users is scary. And so they kind of build their confidence with internal users and then kind of move from there.
Interesting. I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, that you kind of expect that, I would think.
Totally. Yeah. And, you know, we want to encourage them to also move towards those user facing, you know, use cases when they're ready, because obviously, you know, most businesses are looking for, of course, you know, cost optimization, but revenue and growth is oftentimes like their number one goal, right? And so that's, you know, when you really can get, um, you know, AI in front of customers in a useful way, that can really unlock growth. Now, I will say that just like anything, if, you know, I did before this, I worked in e-commerce for 5 years, and there's so much A/B experimentation. Do you think you're going to put the button here and it's going to make more sense, or you're going to add another payment method and people are going to convert more because you know they use Apple Pay, and then for some reason it doesn't happen. And so the same, you know, any sort of customer facing use case, you need to go have hypothesis and then test it quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it's not the first, you know, customer facing use case that you think of with AI that's the most helpful, and sometimes it's, you know, much more basic than you expected. Like, oh, I'm going to build this chatbot that's going to do 50 things. But okay, if you just did this analysis for them with the click of a button, that was like a big mental friction point for them. You know, your conversion increases 2x. You know, so it's, again, it's this iterative process when it comes to building AI, is what we found.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask, I know we're close to time. I wanted to ask, like, what do you see either, you know, as the future for the next year to 3 years for executives, when it comes to AI? Like, what's going to change? Obviously, you said they all need to be like thinking about it, figuring out how they focus function first and use machines and people in sort of the symbiotic way. But is there any other big predictions you have for how it's going to change? Should executives be worried about being replaced by AI? This is something that, you know, like software engineers and others think about a lot. Yeah.
I think the answer is yes to all of those. But at what size and scale, and I think is very unknown. Does it make sense for certain functions to be able to be replaced by a PhD level Grok user agent? I think the answer is probably going to be yes for certain companies, especially those who maybe don't have something in house or only have it partial and don't want to scale it up. I think every company should take the time to map out all their functional processes, as well as just just all the functions of a role, and then all the processes that are happening inside of a company. Let's break those apart. So like more people and then process. And then as they map those out through the entire organization, there's going to be places where I think naturally a machine could be a substitute or a value add. And I think you start there. I think you start with, okay, this is the best place to use this for us. A holistic approach where you kind of start and build everything together is optimal, but I think it's very difficult for operators. And so without maybe somebody like me or somebody else coming in from the outside, if you just said, guys, we're going to spend half a day or a couple working lunches mapping out every function in the company, like what does sales look like? What does marketing look like? What does this look like? And then also, what are the processes for all of these? Those aren't easy to get through, but you can get through them on your own. And when you do that, I think you're going to find the gaps most naturally in the next year and a half. And that's what you should attack first. So you make some progress and understand how it works for you and for the org. And then the chips are going to fall where they may. You're going to maybe find that you don't need to hire a chief legal officer because you feel like you can do a lot of it through Grok. Then you might find that we can hold off on hiring a finance role because we feel like we can get some of this data out. And so I think there's going to be pieces like that rather than wholesale changes. I would expect those wholesale changes to be somewhere in the 3 to 5 to 7 year range. There's AI is moving awfully fast, but if we still look at other examples inside organizations, inside structures, it still takes years to really see how they're affecting organizations. I think AI will be the fastest yet, but I mean, we're already enough into this to see there hasn't been a huge change for the way a lot of executive teams operate, and they're still doing just fine. But I would expect that to change. It's only going to be more competitive. Business is always a 24/7 really competitive environment. And if you're on an exec team or you're the founder, you really get that. And here's another amazing tool to help you get better.
Totally. Well, yeah, it's been a great conversation, and thanks for taking the time. Where can folks follow you or learn more about Petra Coach?
On LinkedIn and on X, so probably the easiest. Rob at Petra Coach is my email if you want to reach out directly. But happy to interact. I think there's so much opportunity for founders. If there is a way as a founder to grow and scale your idea in ways that were simply not possible just a few years ago, between things like Replit to build code and actually build functional products with much smaller teams, your idea, your vision, what you really want, that the creative side of you that always thinks something should get built and done, that's out there. And I would encourage people to do it more than ever to control your own destiny. I think if you're scared of AI, understand that if you control AI and as a tool and you can wield it, then it's not going to control you. And that might
Definitely.
be maybe help somebody get off the fence and get going. I hope it does.
Love it. Thanks for that, and couldn't agree more. Thanks again for the time, Rob, and looking forward to chatting again soon.
It's a pleasure, Tyler. Good luck.
Thank you.